We are going to be doing a video on experiences in medicine. We started last time on how to start a private practice, and we're going to talk about the second step of starting a private practice. And the first step I recommended for starting a private practice was to establish a PC, which is a professional corporation. I mentioned that the professional corporation can be started with the assistance of an accountant or a lawyer. My personal experience, I used a lawyer at the time, Wale Adiamo, who started my practice. I think it cost maybe in 2000, maybe $700 or thereabout. But now the price is usually between $500 to $1,000 and can be set up by a very good accountant or by a very good lawyer. The more important thing is to remember, especially in a state like ours, New York State, you are setting up a limited liability company, but the professional corporation means that you have to have some interface with the New York State Department of Education, making it not just a simple limited liability company or a professional corporation. What's the difference? The difference is the fact that the people who can join your practice must be professional like you, and it's not a simple limited liability company. And that may be one of the first things you'll do. This allows you to be able to separate your personal from your personal income from your practice income. Now, often enough, people say, "Why is this?" Some of it is simple money. There's a fixed corporation tax, and there are different individual taxes depending on how much income you are making. And if you have a fixed corporation tax, you always know exactly how much you're being taxed than if you had different incomes at different time when you're starting a private practice. And this is one of the reasons I'm recommending that this should be done at the outset. It's interesting that people ask additional questions which you may not know about for people about to start a practice, whether they should have an S corporation or have a C corporation. As my personal recommendation, I recommend that you should have a C corporation. One of the reasons is that somewhere along the line you're going to set up a pension for yourself. You're going to purchase healthcare insurance for yourself as well as members of the practice. And a C corporation sometimes is much better to be able to set rules and regulations that can be followed by people who will join your practice or even take over the practice in future. So when you make it an S is just like an extension of yourself more than a separate entity that conducts business separately. So this I will stop by on talking about the professional corporation. So what is the next step you want to do? The next step depends on what type of practice that you are. When I started practice as a solo specialist practice. In fact, when I started practice in 2000, I think my professional corporation took almost a year to get established. Everybody told me private practice was dead. And in fact, not only that, I met a couple of very colleagues of mine who are already in private practice who told me, "Oh, if you want to do a private specialty practice, maybe you should first of all start as an internist, and then when you refer a patient to a specialist, that person will refer that patient back to you because they know you're a pulmonologist, and so on and so forth. And that way you can have something to trade. So patients were like something you traded between. So if you had a large volume of internal medicine patients, then you can use to trade for people to send you pulmonologists. Well, at the time, I had qualified from the St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, at that time now called Mount Sinai, St. Luke's and Mount Sinai Roosevelt, and I was the first graduate who had graduated in pulmonary, critical care, and sleep medicine. So at the time, I felt in my mind, if I was one of the first quadruple boarded physicians who had just graduated, why will I have to act like I was an internist when what I had was sufficiently over almost anybody else when I arrived in Long Island? And not, it didn't even matter whether I was in Long Island, whatever I was in the country, I was uniquely well trained by that organization, and there was no reason why I had to act like a chicken when I was an eagle. Anyway, taking that by the side. The more important thing is that you must decide what you want to do. However, most people sanitary practice are usually nurse practitioners and primary care physicians and family practice. And therefore, once you incorporate, you establish a line of probity for yourself that allows you to be able to make sure you keep your personal and private facilities separate. So what's the second thing you need to do? The second thing you need to do is open a bank account. When your practice is incorporated, you take that paperwork, you take it down to a bank. At the time when I opened my private practice, there were two banks that I used. One, Washington Mutual, which doesn't exist anymore, and the second one was Chase, JP Morgan Chase. Now, why do I recommend them? I think JP Morgan Chase is big, and people will like a small, tiny community bank, which will like your business compared to a big bank where you're like a small fish in a big ocean. However, with Washington Mutual and Chase at the time where I set up, I was treated as if I was their most important client, especially with Washington Mutual Bank. And I got, at that time, a personal banker when I had no money who was assigned to take care of my needs when I came in. Now, this is the next step that you do when you open a private practice. Now, the third logical step is not really actually what I'm going to tell you to do. The third logical step is how to get financing. The reality is that when I started, and probably hasn't changed 20 years later, is that banks do not necessarily finance private practices. Why? Because traditional banks are places where they make money in safe areas. They do not know, they feel that most doctors have had too long, large student loans, and are not a very good investment, unlike an IT guy or like a startup guys in computers and internet business, which to me is one of the saddest part of banking. And when I started private practice, with my credit cards. And essentially, I approached my bank at that time, Citibank, and presented a plan. And then the guy who I met, who had struck up a relationship because it was my very first bank when I became a resident, which was 1994. And I felt that, I've been in the bank long enough, so 16 years should have been enough to establish a relationship. But it apparently did not work very well. And then when I understood that clearly, so it wasn't a purely like a ding for Citibank, it's just that banks are not that into traditional funding of private practices as they were in the past. Nowadays, they are into other areas which seem more profitable and quicker for them. So if you really wanted to get funding from a source and you could not provide private funding from your own finances, then probably non-traditional places like PayPal, Bankers Health Group, there was something called National Association of Doctors. However, the interest rates from these places are pretty high, even though they are willing to fund you at the beginning of your practice. So in my opinion, best place, family and friends, and your own personal finances. That's the best place to be able to start from. You believe in yourself, you know yourself, and therefore you know the ability of yourself to succeed. So therefore, I was my first believer and I believed in myself, and that's how private practice was started. Now, how else can you fund for yourself? So, for example, I had a full-time job which was excellent, one of the best jobs in the world. I worked for RIMA, Roosevelt Island Medical Associates, which ran Kola Goldwater Hospital at the time. So I had a job, pretty stable, nice, no hassle. But what is the pull in private practice that makes people go there? there are three major pools. One of the things is the fact that the healthcare system is at the moment skewed towards big hospital systems. And big hospital systems try to argue that they are somehow or the other much better in handling healthcare system. But COVID has shown us how bad they are, and they have shown us the inconsistencies of the healthcare system and their lip service to actually taking care of system. And that's even a great state like New York, where there are no for-profit places, where most places are non-profit, where you need certificate of need to be able to establish a hospital and so on and so forth. But scandals upon scandals of hospital executives and running places like aground, like the Medicis, like Interfaith, and so on and so forth, abound. And the same thing occurs in Long Island. So the reality is that private practices are more spread and are more likely to diversify healthcare. So therefore, you are more likely to find a private practice which will be able to practice in a disadvantaged group. So for example, one of the first person who led me to private practice was a Dr. Buza, and he practiced mainly among Romanians. And among the Romanians, he was a steadfast private practice guy, and people went to him because they trusted him. And prior to his starting practice in that area, that particular group was disadvantaged. Also, among minority populations, certain groups of doctors are just going to set up, let's say you're born in West Hempstead and you had a privileged upbringing. When you want to start private practice, they're more likely to want to get there. But however, next door, which is Hempstead, which may have a lot of people who need you, is the least likely place where you're going to set up a private practice. And that's one of the advantages of the private practice. Allows you to make a choice that is related to your heart, not related purely to what the world is telling you. The second thing private practice allows is that it allows you to be in control of your destiny. When you're employed by a hospital, you can be fired at will, not even because you have done anything, as we have seen recently. Maybe you criticize something which is right, which you want to change, and because of that, somebody who's an administrator is able to have you removed from your position. So being in private practice allows you to be able to have your own control of your own destiny, and therefore you can do things because of the way you want it done. And this is an important part of starting. I started as a solo practitioner, and I can tell you it's a more difficult thing to start, and it's better to start with 2 or 3 of you to start at the same time. And I have a colleague who we used to cross cover each other, and the practice grew once 3 of them came together as a private pulmonary group. Even though one of them had been a solo practitioner, the other one had been part of a multi-specialty group, while the other one had been out of a group specialty group, but coming together allowed them to be able to grow faster. However, I'm only citing this as an example. For you, if you have the desire, you have the vision, starting as a solo practitioner is perfectly fine. There's no way. People always ask, is there money in it? Of course there's money in it. If not, the healthcare system will have dropped out of the bucket, will have the bottom will have dropped out of the bucket in the healthcare system. So what you have to do, you have to run the business just like every other business, keeping your overhead down. We're not going to. I've talked 1 about setting up a practice. 2, first thing is to open a bank account, and then 3 is how to finance your business. I've given you different options, and at the next recording, we're going to be talking about an important part on how to get patients. I may talk about it very briefly now, but I will go into a little bit in detail in the next recording. One of them is getting patients from a previous practice or building a patient's population on your own. Those are the areas, and I'll talk to you about the pros and the cons of that. And as many are looking forward towards the next recording, we'll hope you get ready, and we'll talk about this at the next recording. Have a great day. Today, I'm wearing the shirt of my son, which is Kwanzaa Global. he's running his own business, and therefore, in support of him, I've won his hoodie as part of this recording, and we'll talk